Hi, everyone. Great to see so many people here to hear about Bitbucket pipelines. Before I started, I wanted to talk a little bit about my journey into product management, because I'm actually relatively new as a product manager at Atlassian. Started just this year. And prior to that, I was an engineering manager. And so one of the things I've seen through many years, I managed the Confluence development team, a team of about 100 developers. And I've seen all kinds of teams struggling with deployments, releases, builds. And that's why I'm so excited about the future that we're bringing with Bitbucket pipelines. I think it really is a novel approach to build and release, and I'm really excited to talk to you about it today. So the first thing to talk about is cloud teams. We're really focused on teams moving to the cloud, building stuff on SaaS at Atlassian. And we know from talking to lots of teams that teams want to move faster. How can teams move faster? One of the key things we think about development teams moving fast in the cloud is continuous delivery. What that means to us is really that your code is always deployable. You have master in a great state, your builds are passing, your release is ready to go, whatever you want. What do you need to have to do that? You have to have fast, automated tests. You can't have a build process that takes hours or days. You got to have it fast, reliable. And then at the end of it, you need a push-button deployment process that really lets you take your code out to customers without a whole heap of manual steps along the way. Now, an important thing to differentiate here, when people are talking about CD, sometimes they talk about continuous delivery, sometimes they talk about continuous deployment. So on one hand, continuous delivery, we're talking about master being always deployable. On the other hand, with continuous deployment, we're talking about master being automatically deployed, every commit going to production as soon as the tests pass. Now, what we've seen from interviews with teams, talking to lots of people over the years, is that getting to automatic deployment is actually really, really hard. And for many businesses, it just doesn't make sense. You need to have some manual testing in there. You need to have a set of steps before you push stuff out to production. Maybe it just doesn't make sense to do upgrades all the time because you have some downtime. You need to do database upgrades, things like that. What we want to push is we want to enable all teams to do continuous delivery. So really focus on making their code deployable as often as possible. We think most, or if not all, teams can achieve this, and this is what Pipelines is built for. So why do you want to do continuous delivery? What are the benefits? Well, luckily there's been some research into this and analysis done by various consultants. We have a bunch of information collected on our website on atlassian.com/continuous delivery. And the benefits are really faster time to market for your business. So bringing things out quickly, you're taking away bottlenecks in the development process that slow things down a lot. If you're doing this build, integrate, test cycle that can take weeks or months, what you find is that you start optimizing different parts of the process in a way that doesn't speed up your time to market as much as if you can automate and release faster. The second thing is better products. So with a faster feedback loop, you're reducing the batch size, you get faster feedback for your team, and you can iterate on your product faster. And then the last benefit is happier teams. So one thing we see a lot, and I know this from experience in the Confluence dev team, is that the release process, when it becomes painful, it becomes specialized knowledge in the team. And then what you need is you need one or two people in the team who really understand the release process to take ownership of that process almost every time. And those people get burnt out, they get tired of doing the releases, they have to do it every week or every month, and it becomes something that the team dreads. So having that automation flow where you've got a continuous delivery process where master is always deployable and the release process is push button, that results in a happier team where devs are not annoyed that they have to pick up and do the release. It's something that they can actually be excited about. So just a hands up in the audience here. Who's already doing automated testing or continuous delivery of some sort? Yeah, cool. That's what I expect. So those people who put their hand up, I guess you already know that setting up these things is not a panacea. It's actually painful itself. You get pain when you set up CI/CD. One of the challenges is complexity. You have a bunch of build scripts, you have a bunch of agent configuration files, you have all this stuff that you need to manage somehow, quickly becomes a mess. You have to set up infrastructure for your builds. So as well as having infrastructure for your environments like test and production, you also have like specialized build infrastructure. And then maybe that gets big enough that you need a dedicated team just to maintain your build infrastructure. So there's like all this work to set it up. There's multiple tools. Teams are switching between their build tools and their coding tools day to day. And so we find like a lot of friction there with like, oh, I need to go and watch the build and make sure it passes, and then jump back to the pull request that I'm working on and switching between those tools can be a pain. And overall, this is just like a slow feedback loop for your developers. And our whole goal with development is to ship stuff to customers faster. So we want to have better CI/CD tools can help with that. There's also the fact that you have usually a limited number of resources for your build infrastructure. So you might have maybe 5 or 10 build agents, and maybe you have 10 or 20 developers. At some point in time, those developers are going to be waiting for those build agents to become available. That queue time, the time that developers are waiting for their feedback, is lost time. So we built Bitbucket pipelines to solve those problems. It offers a fully hosted CI/CD solution in Bitbucket. It's built on Docker containers, which enables some great things I'll talk about later. And it's integrated with your code in Bitbucket, so you can see exactly what's going on all the time. So let me tell you a bit about the story of how pipelines came to be. So it was about 2 years ago, we started thinking about how we could really build an amazing CI/CD solution in the cloud. We've had Bamboo for a long time, and Bamboo's great. It solves a variety of needs across many platforms. But we thought there was an opportunity to build something purpose-built for cloud that would really enable cloud teams to move fast. So we put together a team. Here's our pipelines team in Sydney. When we started, it was about half this size. And we got the team together and we said, hey guys, what can we do with emerging technologies like Docker, with powering things on the cloud, running on AWS? What can we build for customers that's going to be new and exciting and help them solve these problems that they have with CI/CD? So our vision was 3 things, really. The first part was making it effortless. We wanted it to be completely easy to set up. By integrating with Bitbucket, when you set up CI/CD and pipelines, you don't have to create anything new. You don't have to add users to a new system. You don't have to set up any servers. You don't have to do anything to run builds either. Like, the builds are fully hosted for you. There's no configuration to do. We wanted it to be fast. CI/CD is all about the speed of feedback for your developers. So we wanted there to be no queuing. We wanted there to be unlimited agents. And the UI had to be fast and responsive as well, so you can see what's happening in your build. And lastly, we wanted it to be a capable system. We wanted it to enable all kinds of different build strategies. Through Docker support, we got access to an amazing library of Docker containers. People can build their own as well. And these were the 3 pillars that we thought about when we put together Bitbucket pipelines. So what does it look like? I want to walk you through a quick demo. So here we're looking at Bitbucket. This is a Node.js repository in Bitbucket. It's a simple calculator application. And if you look over there on the left-hand side, pipelines is there. It's a new feature of Bitbucket. You can look at the navigation on the left, and you'll see we've got a new menu item there. So getting started with pipelines, if you haven't used it before, it's basically as simple as like putting your code in Bitbucket, which with Git is just a single push. And then you go to the Pipelines tab in your repository. Now here you can see our landing page, our welcome page for pipelines. Kind of explains a little bit of what the product's about. Fast CI/CD in the cloud, quick and easy to get going. There's a customer quote there, talks about how easy it is to set up. And then we make clear to everyone that every Bitbucket plan comes with free build minutes. So pipelines, rather than charging you for agents, we charge you for your usage. It's similar to the Elastic Cloud, where we're charging you for the minutes that you use, not for the time you're not using. You can see the platforms we support there. It's available on all the major platforms. And you can see a screenshot of what your build's going to look like once you get up and going. So configuring this is incredibly easy. We're going to scroll down the page now. Here's the configuration screen. And we've automatically selected a template based on the type of repository that this is, which is a JavaScript one. Now, Bitbucket Pipelines is configured through a simple YAML file. So you can see that on the screen here. We have a little bit of documentation linked off as well that you can go and read about it. But in this case, I'm just going to make some quick, simple changes before I commit this file. The first one is to upgrade the version of Node. I want to use Node 8.4. It was simple as changing that version number there. And then I'm going to go down and change the commands here a little bit because we use Yarn to build our project rather than NPM. And I'm going to make sure that the colors are coming out in the output because Yarn has some really beautiful test reporting when you run your tests. So that's that's all the changes we need to do to start using pipelines. Let's commit that file and get going. So now you're into pipelines, you're running your first build. You didn't have to set up any infrastructure. You didn't have to set up any agents. There's no configuration, no permissions, no user management, none of that. This is a build system built into Bitbucket. Now it's running my tests, and lucky I set up that build, it's found a test failure. So we'll come back in a minute to see how we can fix that test failure. But let's see about how we've integrated pipelines through the Bitbucket experience. So if you go to the repository overview page, you get a summary of the most recent build for the default branch. So you can see that master's failed there. If we keep navigating through Bitbucket, you can see what we've integrated it through all the screens. On the commit view, you can see which commits had the build pass and fail. In this case, it's just the most recent one. You can see it for all your branches in your repository as well. So your developers that are developing on feature branches will know whether their branch is ready to merge in or not. And lastly, we have a full history of all the builds here in the pipeline view and the ability to filter by branch there as well. I'll drill into that in a bit more detail later. So in the background, someone's fixed the test, or maybe they've just commented it out. And now we're going to see the build kick off again. Let's jump in and see what's happening. Again, with pipelines, you're getting a live view into your build. These log files are streaming live from the build agent that's running in the cloud for you. And it looks like, fingers crossed, we get a green build this time. All right, we're good. That's great. So now we've got pipelines up and running. Every time our team commits and pushes to Bitbucket, this build's going to run. We have a CI/CD solution ready for us in the cloud with barely any configuration. So how does it work behind the scenes? I thought you guys, a lot of developers and interested people here, I'm sure, want to understand a bit about how pipelines works. Maybe the first thing to point out is that pipelines is built on our Connect framework, our cloud extension framework. And it doesn't actually live inside Bitbucket at all, really. Like, we use Connect to add a new menu item and a new screen to Bitbucket, but then all the pipeline processing is done externally in separate services that we run independent of Bitbucket. This is kind of interesting because anyone out there in the ecosystem could, in theory, build a similar kind of add-on for Bitbucket or any of other cloud tools. So this is really showing part of the power of the platform in the cloud that we're building for all our customers and ecosystem partners. But let's look at the specifics of pipelines. So when you do a git push, pipelines is keeping track of that. It goes and looks at your Bitbucket pipelines YAML file, looks at the key pieces of configuration that you've added there. Firstly, there's a build container. So it's picked up the image name there, which is a node container in this case. It starts a Docker container for you, and then it checks out your source code into that Docker container, and then starts to run the script for you. So the script is a set of commands that you provide to pipelines. In this case, it's running npm install and npm test, and as those commands generate output, that'll be captured by the build tool and shown to you in the log file. If those commands all succeed, you get a green build. It's as simple as that. Behind the scenes, what's actually happening is we have an enormous Kubernetes cluster, which is an open source Docker engine. And what we have is a set of workers, each of which are EC2 instances, and each of those run up to 7 customer builds at a time. And those elastic instances are scaling out as demand requires for our customers. So you never need to wait for a build agent to be available because we have a cloud there with thousands and thousands of build agents for you. Behind the scenes, we're keeping track of a queue of every commit and processing them off, handing them off to workers. And then as the builds finish up, we send the status back to Bitbucket through its build status API. And then notifications are posted to the relevant channels, whether that's Stride, HipChat, Slack, whatever tool that you're using. What that means for you, what all this infrastructure work is doing for you, is that you have build capacity always available. You don't need to set up new hardware. You don't need to roll out new instances on your VMware cluster. You don't need to talk to anyone. You don't have to wait for agents to start. Your developers have capacity when they're committing. And because we charge by build minute rather than giving you a limited number of agents, you have unlimited concurrency on Bitbucket pipelines. So you can run as many builds as your team needs all the time. Because when you think about it, the benefit of this is that it's saving your developers time, which is a far more scarce resource than the cost of a few EC2 agents or build minutes. Like, if you can stop those developers sitting around waiting for the build to pass or waiting for each other because you have a big queue, it's really going to improve the efficiency of your entire team. But you don't have to trust me. We've got some great customer quotes. You can search on Twitter for people loving Bitbucket pipelines. I'll just read a couple out to you. I set up Bitbucket pipelines for a Java project today. Super easy. Why would I not use this instead of Jenkins? Or just fell in love with pipelines from Bitbucket. Works perfectly with Sales.js. Or someone's in love with Bitbucket pipelines. I didn't think people would fall in love with their CI server, but apparently you can. So let's look a bit closely at some of the features that make people love pipelines so much. So the first one, as I mentioned before, is we're integrated into Bitbucket. In the commit view, you can see like a whole history of all your commits and whether they passed or failed the build. Maybe more importantly, we show this on the pull request screen. So as part of your code review process, you can be making sure that the build passes before the changes are merged into master. With Bitbucket merge checks, you can also enforce that the build has to pass before the changes are merged to master as well. So this is a way that dev teams can ensure quality in their release process. Lastly, there's the pipeline screen itself, which gives you the ability to filter on particular branches. As developers move to the branch model of Git for working, where you create a feature branch, each dev is able to jump into this screen, look at their own feature branch, and see exactly what the build status is for the stuff that they're working on. This is a really powerful view that is really popular with our customers, and it's amazing how just building a CI/CD tool that's just for the cloud, just for Git, is really enabling these new ways of working that are much more efficient and much simpler. The second benefit of pipelines is configuration as code, which has the obvious benefit that suddenly your build configuration is not tied up in a build server, but it's stored alongside your code and versioned with your code. This means you can tag it, you can do all the things you do with your source code, you can edit it, pull requests, things like that. One of the more interesting things to do with it is to do a branch workflow for staging changes to your build. So often when you're changing your build configuration, the old way of doing it is you'd log on to the build server, you'd go in and edit the configuration, and then you'd save it, and then you'd cross your fingers. And hopefully, the build configuration doesn't break the build for everyone in the team, and then you're scrambling to try and fix it. With pipelines, you can create a branch, change the configuration on the branch, test those changes for the new build process, make sure they're working properly, and then merge them back into master. And so suddenly you've got a branching testing workflow that's going to work for build configuration changes, not just for the application code. The second thing, which we're big fans of at Atlassian, is like empowering the modern DevOps team. So it's about having DevOps teams being responsible for their entire process from code all the way through to deployment. We see this kind of pattern forming sometimes where build engineers start becoming responsible for pieces of the build infrastructure. And this takes the knowledge of the build out of the application team, and then you've got lots of coordination required when you want to try and change your build process. We believe by bringing the configuration for the build back into the repository, you're enabling ownership by the team that's building the application. You can end up with much faster turnaround times on just basic tasks like improving and streamlining your build process. Bitbucket Pipelines has a ton of integrations as well. We're integrated with all the popular cloud platforms, Azure, AWS, Google Cloud Platform. We have integrations with QA tools like Browser Stack, lots of other automation tools as well. Launch Darkly for feature flags, monitoring tools. All these things are easy to set up, again, because we've built this tool natively in the cloud, able to be integrated with other tools. There's an immense ecosystem of developer tools out there for teams that are willing to take advantage of this. And lastly, we've seen a huge benefit of containers for CI/CD. So containers are one of the hottest technology topics at the moment, as I'm sure you all know. Companies, I was at DockerCon earlier this year and talking to companies like Visa that are busy moving all their code into containers so they can lift and shift their work from on-premise data centers into the cloud. So, this is happening across our industry. Companies are moving work into containers, their application into containers. But what we've found is that containers are actually great for build systems as well. And here are some of the benefits you might not realize for build systems. I guess the first thing is containers are much faster to start up than VMs, which is the typical way your build system used to start up jobs for you. And that pays off in all the dev time you save. There's the open source Docker Hub. Has like 100,000 images, which is all pre-built build environments that you can use with pipelines. Docker's composable, which for a build environment is great because you might have one team sets up their build environment and then you've got another team that wants to pick up that same build environment, make some tweaks to it, and use it pretty much the same. And those changes can all be tracked through the Docker file, pushed into Bitbucket and versioned there. So Docker is a great fit for build environments for CI/CD. And the last one is how reproducible it is. So you've got a production environment that you're trying to test in your CI/CD server, but historically it's been really hard to get the environment the same. You know, you might have a lot of Puppet scripts to manage dependencies, you have other scripts to run the Puppet scripts to keep the servers up to date, and all this infrastructure to try and just maintain some similarity between production and test. With the Docker containers, you can replicate your production environment. It can all be configured through your Docker file, and the devs can also debug locally if they have problems. So we're seeing huge benefits from containers for CI/CD, and that's why we're going out to container conferences like DockerCon and talking about how containers are great for CI/CD, not just for application development. So who in the room uses Docker at the moment? Quick show of hands. Oh, that's pretty good. About half the people. Yeah, wow. Who likes it? Who likes it? Likes working with it? Yeah, me too. I think it's awesome. So if you like Docker, you'll like some of the features I'm going to talk about today, because we have 3 great new features, two of which we've already shipped, and one that's in the pipeline at the moment. Boom, boom. The first one's Docker build and push support. So what's this? It's about running Docker commands in your build, like build, tag, and push. Why would you want to run Docker commands in your build? Well, if you're doing Docker-based development, like some of the people in this room are, then what you can do is you can build those containers in pipelines, you can test them on pipelines, and then you can push them to your Docker registry from pipelines as well. So you've got that whole flow of build, test, and push. And then because pipelines uses build environments that are also Docker images, you can build and test your build environment on pipelines, and then push it to a Docker registry, and then pick it up in another build to use as the build environment. So kind of completes this nice little circle of Docker goodness that you can do with pipelines now. The configuration is really easy. All you need to do is put enable Docker as true. It has a slight startup penalty, which is the reason why it's opt-in. We didn't want to slow down everyone's builds when only maybe some percentage of people are using Docker. And then you can use your Docker commands just like it was running on your own machine. Authentication with Docker registries can be done very easily, as you see. You can build and you can push up your tagged images to your own registry. In the UI, the commands just show up like normal commands. You can see the output. If they fail, they'll fail. You get the log output. It's really quite easy to use. So that's Docker build and push. The second feature, maybe a little bit more interesting, is service containers. So what are service containers about? Service containers are for running additional services that you need usually for your test environment. So the services start up and stop automatically during your build, and they provide databases and other services that your application might need for testing purposes. And again here, what you're leveraging is the open source community that has built more than 100,000 images on Docker Hub. You can pull all those images down to use in your test environment on pipelines. So the examples I'm showing here are MySQL, Postgres, and Redis, but in reality there are thousands of different libraries and tools that you might need to use in your build. You can pull those down from Docker Hub, start them up automatically, have them available in your build with minimal configuration. Let's have a look at how it works. Here's a slightly more complicated pipeline configuration. Up in your step here, you have your image and your script, like we talked about before. And then you have a set of services that you're starting up. In this case, we give them nice short names, like database and Redis. And then down here in the definition section, we say exactly what those things are. So we've got MySQL 5.7 with a simple configuration there. It creates a test database for us. And we've got Redis 3.2 starting up as well. So if we wanted to change our build configuration to use MySQL 5.8 instead of 5.7, it's like literally one character to change. Like when you compare that to like how hard it would be to go back through a build agent, maybe go and install MySQL, check that it's all working properly, like this is a much simpler way to set up your builds through pipelines. Some of the other things I wanted to call out are that everything in pipelines is done as a branch level configuration. So you can have different services start up on different branches. This might be handy if, for example, you're doing feature branching and you want to do unit tests on all your feature branches and then do the integration tests with the database after you merge to master. That's the flexibility that you have with this configuration. We also tried to make it as simple as possible, not requiring unnecessary configuration. So services in Bitbucket pipelines all bind to the same network interface. So you can just connect to localhost on the appropriate port. There's no need to like map ports or make sure that the services can talk to the build environment. Lastly, we tried to remove the memory configuration as well and make it easier so that we automatically sized the service containers to fit within the 4 GB limit that you have running on pipelines, rather than requiring you to think about, oh, how much memory does this need? Is it enough memory? Is it going to run out of memory? All those kind of things. In the UI in pipelines, you'll see the services show up as tabs. And you get the full log output for each service here in pipelines as well. And it's streaming live while your build is running too. So if there's problems when you start up Redis or MySQL in this case, you'll be able to look at the log file, work out what they are, and fix them really fast. And that's service containers. So with those two things combined with Docker build and push and service containers, we're seeing a huge uplift in the abilities of Bitbucket pipelines, particularly to cater for more complicated testing scenarios. So that's something we'd like to see you guys try out as well. If you have interesting test environments, things that you think you might want to try out with pipelines, I would recommend that. The third feature I want to talk about today is multiple steps. And this is something we're still working on at the moment. Multiple steps lets you name the steps in your pipeline and pass files between them. And then each step is actually run independently and tells you where in the build it broke. And the reason why you have to pass files between them is because each step is actually its own independent container. And the reason why we're building them this way is because in the future you'll be able to run those steps in parallel across our build cluster, again with unlimited concurrency, and be able to test things in parallel for faster builds. For the moment, the real application of this is using different Docker images in each stage. So with the example I showed before with Node version 6 versus Node version 8, it's actually quite a common requirement that people want to test their application with different versions of those dependencies. So multiple steps makes that possible for you with Bitbucket pipelines. So this is the UI that's actually still under development, so it's not quite final yet. But the idea is there on the left-hand side, you'll be able to see the pipeline flow. We're going to have like some deployment steps and things like that coming in the future, and this is how that's going to be represented in Bitbucket pipelines. So you can expect to see that in the coming months. So with these features in Bitbucket pipelines, what we're seeing is that customers now have the ability to do full application lifecycle development all in one development tool in Bitbucket Cloud. They can start with a pre-baked build container, pulling that down from their own registry or from Docker Hub. They can do the build process, run a script to compile, package up their service. They can do all the testing that they need. They can spin up services, they can integrate with databases, they can check that everything's working properly, run integration tests out in the cloud, they can talk out to browser stack, run some browser-specific tests. They can do everything that they need to do. Once the artifact's been validated, they can push their Docker images to the registry of their choice. Obviously, you can also use Maven registries or NPM or whatever you're using to like push your artifacts out to a storage. Then you can trigger the deployment directly from pipelines as well. So we have lots of people, as I mentioned before, doing automated deployments to staging and test environments. You can automate all the way through to production or have a manual stage in your pipeline that deploys to production. And what this does in combination, it gives you the ability to respond really quickly to problems. You've got an automated testing cycle, a push-button deployment process, and this is the benefit of continuous delivery that I talked about earlier. You know, it's the happier teams, it's the faster response to customers, it's the shorter feedback loop, and it's the faster time to market for your development efforts. But again, you don't have to trust me on this. We have some great customer quotes and great customers using pipelines every day. 50 hours of Jenkins configuration takes 5 minutes and 15 lines with Bitbucket pipelines. That's Bernie Lees, CEO at DCBL. And we now rely on Bitbucket pipelines for our entire continuous delivery strategy. We can go from a developer pushing to Bitbucket to live in less than a minute. But this is Chris Knight in the UK, who's CTO at Heavenly. Heavenly's a luxury goods e-commerce startup. So they sell like shoes and handbags and jewelry and stuff like that. And these guys have a small dev team that supports a huge number of customers. And by using pipelines, they can make sure that their dev loop cycle is fast and responsive to customers all around the world. So my last question for today, I wanted to ask you guys, who stores their code in the cloud? And who are the brave few? Oh, okay, yeah, that's good. And who's on the other side? Who keeps their code on-prem? Okay, so my request for you, the last group, is I guess everyone needs a kind of trigger point to try out using the cloud infrastructure, I think. And I know there's a million reasons why your organization can't do it. There's security restrictions, there's compliance, there's all this stuff. I just want to urge you to try and think about your next project. Maybe it's a pilot project. Maybe it's a personal project. It's something that you're going to try, throw a few new technologies in the mix. Give Bitbucket Cloud a try, give pipelines a shot. I think you'll really like it, and it's going to change your view of what's possible with CI/CD. And that's my homework for you guys. So with that, thanks very much.